Hey, Taylor, awesome. Winning all these awards all the time and just amazing what you're doing. That you created, the top educational company in the world today. And then, of course, you have your like chief scientist, I guess, right? Matt Cummins. So thank you for both coming online and doing this interview.
Yeah, thanks for having us. We're excited to chat with you today.
Thanks, Steve.
So if we can start off with a little bit of background, Taylor, I'll start with you and then we'll go to Matt. If you can give me maybe two inflection points in your life that really defined who you are today, and it could have been when you were like 5 years old, it could have been something that happened in the family, outside the family, mentors, it could be inside, outside school, it could have been an early job. So Taylor, what made you this wonderful person you are today?
Yeah, as far as two inflection points that shaped my life, really, I think it's the story of my mom. So growing up, she was raised in a small town in Louisiana called West Monroe, Louisiana. She's of the age where she actually had to go through desegregation in her schooling. And all throughout my life, from a very young age, she would tell me little things like, yeah, when we desegregated schools, I was so surprised. And in the textbooks I was using, all of the pages were there. And often she taught me, right? It's things that, and at the time I had no idea the significance of what she was like kind of imprinting on me. But I've heard about her educational journey kind of at every step, like her first exposure to college, which happened to come through an uncle, or when she went and moved away from her hometown, how that was her goal of moving to a city of bigger opportunity to pass down to her kids. So I would first say definitely the story of my mom and my grandmother, and just my lineage of having, been somebody that's overcome and generations of people that have used education and entrepreneurship to overcome things. The second inflection point is I am a collegiate athlete, proud athlete, and I was the youngest of seven to earn a scholarship to play basketball in college. At the time, I had aspirations of becoming a reconstructive plastic surgeon. I jokingly tell people I love biology. I wanted to help people, and I grew up watching Grey's Anatomy. So I wanted to be a plastic surgeon. And ultimately, it wasn't until I was sitting in a college chemistry class that I recognized that my math skills, I wasn't taught as strong as math skills as I should have been in order to pursue that career pathway. And ultimately, when I looked at my entire world, I said, okay, my parents put me in an area of privilege where I was in some of the best schools that Texas had to offer. What about my cousins that never made it out of poverty, that never made it out of West Monroe? If I wasn't prepared for the next step and to get the career of my dreams, then this is a problem that's not only impacting low socioeconomic status folks, Black and brown folks, but it's really something that impacts all of us. So those are really the two biggest inflection points that have led me on the journey that I am on today.
So that's the really interesting. And you wanted to go into science when you were early young. So you had an early interest in science kind of things or healthcare kind of things.
I love science, biology, and the way the human body works. All biology just made sense to me, whereas I felt like math didn't always just make natural sense. And then I also love the scientific method. I'd argue that in entrepreneurship, it's very much aligned to the scientific method. You have a hypothesis, you go out and you test it, you read the results, and you rinse and repeat over and over again until you have a breakthrough.
Yeah, and then of course your upbringing, right? Because your family had all of these challenges, and then overcoming these challenges and just having resilience and agility and perseverance. You would be endowed and inspired by all of that history. So I can see why you're such a remarkable entrepreneur today. Really a stellar one, world ranked. Now, Matt, I mean, that's going to be hard to follow, right? What are, what are two inflection points in your life?
It usually is when you have to follow Taylor, yeah. So, the two I was thinking of, I guess, the first comes when I was about 17. So I grew up in a small village in England, kind of sleepy place, right? Um, and I was obsessed with philosophy as a teenager. And this was not something that was really covered in school, which was good because school was really boring. I mean, kind of easy at the time. There's a lot of political pressure in terms of grade inflation, but quite tedious. So I was really obsessed with philosophy. and I wanted to go to the best place to study it. And then I actually got in, right? And it's just kind of the Hogwarts letter moment, like with the coming down the chimney and so on, right? Like this was a big deal. And from then on, at Cambridge, I was just normal. And it was normal to work hard and be trying to do things that were maybe on a global stage and so on. I really hadn't experienced that before that point. But then I guess the second one, which is more relevant to how I end up on this particular call, right, is later during my PhD, I was introduced to machine learning. And the big thing, actually, the big takeaway for me about that was just a totally different attitude to statistics and mathematics and what you were using them for, and very much an engineering approach, right, to using those kinds of tools, which was not something I'd really encountered before and continues to amuse me.
It's interesting having an interest in philosophy and things like that when you're 17. Was that part of your family, or your family was kind of in a different space and you were really like an outlier?
Well, so my dad actually went to, this was in Ireland, a long time ago. He actually went to the seminary and then left. So there is a history of interest, I guess, in like theology, but then maybe being a little bit too questioning, right? So definitely some background there.
Right. That makes sense because I'm an investor, and some of the startups that I've invested in, the founders are engineers, but they also taken a master's in theology and things like that. So it makes them really broad thinkers. And so I can see how that broad thinking, maybe at the dinner table or something, you would have with this interest in philosophy. And you go to, you must have done really well on your A levels, right? And
Yes, no, well done for knowing the English system. Yeah. But I will say, you see, they were quite hackable at the time. So there was one, and it was kind of a religious studies that had a little bit of philosophy, right? So that was my favorite. And I learned that there was no negative marking, as they called it at the time. And so what that meant in your exam was if you kept writing, as long as the content was good, you would keep accruing points. And, typically in essay-based systems, especially in the UK, you can't get 100%. Things are kind of capped at like 70 to 80 or whatever. A really exceptional score in a Cambridge exam would be like 87, right? Something like that. Anyway, but I just kept asking for more paper. And so I got 100% in every exam, right? So yeah, that kind of helped propel me. But it really, again, it kind of strayed, right? There's this distinction between school and actual education sometimes.
so Taylor, you created this amazing company, Stemuli, and did you have a pre-entrepreneurial kind of history prior to Stemuli? And can you describe that journey and the lessons you learned, and then how that then incentivized you to create Stemuli? And then from there, how did you get in touch with Matt? So there's a series of questions. So first of all, what's your entrepreneurial journey? How did that lead you to founding a Stemuli?
Yeah. So as far as my entrepreneurial journey, they say the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. So my parents were both entrepreneurs, my mom in real estate and my dad actually in a pretty creative business where he partnered with one of the famous Dallas Cowboys, Drew Pearson. They gained licensing rights for all of the major sports leagues in the United States. So think NBA, NFL, Major League Baseball, all of them. And they started creating what they call swag. So the cool baseball caps with cool designs on them all throughout the 80s and 90s. In fact, if you go back now and look at some of the famous like hip hop artists or R&B artists, oftentimes they have his clothing on. So I would say first, as far as what helped me with my entrepreneurial journey was early exposure to entrepreneurship through my parents. And what came to evolve is my exposure to technology. So even though I told you I was a kid that came from a small town, I was in some of the best private schools in Texas where kids had a lot of disposable income. And so I remember when the first iPod came out, these kids had it. When they had the Macs with the colored backs on them, these kids had that. And so even though I didn't have it in my own home, I did have a computer that I was lucky to dial up into AOL. But I had exposure to the changing tide of technology when we first went from, the T9 texting and so having a full keyboard. And so ultimately the next transition that happened for me is, they talk a lot about some of the greatest leaders never thought they were going to be leaders, right? They were going on another field and they were called to the field. I think that really resonates with me because my athletic career, I was just naturally gifted. So I worked really hard. I performed pretty well, but I didn't really feel like this competitive ambition. And I say that even though I earned a Division I scholarship, that's true to who I was. I ended up losing my scholarship because of a mix between how I was performing academically. I wasn't getting along with my coach. I was kind of the founder type, showing up already at a young age. And so as soon as I lost my scholarship, it was one of the first times that I had actually encountered like failure. I hadn't been failing classes, hadn't failed anything else. And so I had that thought of like, one, when people look back on Taylor Shead, what they cannot see is this massive failure or me letting my family down. Two, the iPhone had just come out about a year and a half before this point in time. And that so inspired me to say, if I can access, a few cool apps at the time on my phone, I should be able to access my education anywhere I am in the world. And so, wrapping up the story on my journey to entrepreneurship, I did start a company at the age of 19. I raised about $500,000 when I started that company. And my first investor was the former president of the learning company, a guy by the name of Brett Bestick. And, the learning company had titles like Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego and Rita Rabbit, essentially what shaped my childhood. And so I say all of that because I was very lucky at the age of 19 to be on my own in Los Angeles and have so many mentors that just saw something in me that they inspired me to dream as big as I wanted to dream, to push the bounds of creativity with technology, and to ultimately go after it. So I was running board meetings, 19 to 21, raised a couple of rounds of capital. And ultimately what happened as far as the precursor to Stemuli is my ideas were just a bit early with the arc of innovation. And so I'm happy to say now our ideas are no longer early, and we're on the fast track to what we believe is something very transformational.
It's really interesting. So entrepreneurship definitely runs in your family. So you've got that entrepreneurship gene in you somewhere, right? And I can see then why you started this company, and really your parents created a foundation too, a mentor network, which you were able to accelerate because of your scholarships and things like that. And you realized the value of relationships, so you're able to leverage those relationships, or that's what I'm assuming anyways. And on this kind of educational entrepreneurship journey, and you, as you indicate, you're a little bit early, and then but now you're perfectly situated with Stemuli. So tell me a little bit more about Stemuli, and then we'll get into Matt, how you got involved with Matt. So maybe in a nutshell, because you're used to pitching VCs and things like that, what's the value proposition of Stemuli? Why is it different and unique, and why should people pay attention?
Sure. So where I'll start, and this sounds so simple, but excuse my French, right now across the world, school sucks. It is boring. Oftentimes what kids are learning has no relevance to their future, and it's not personalized to the individual, even though every time we log into any app, whether on our phone or on the web, all we're getting is information that's personalized to us. So essentially the rest of the world of technology has moved over here, and school has absolutely moved the slowest in the area of innovation and transformation. So first headline is school sucks. Second headline is it's really hard to do business in really any school system for a variety of different reasons. There's a lot of trust issues. There's a lot of bureaucracy, politics, relationship building, as you mentioned. So the next thing that happens is you have these generations of entrepreneurs who have all experienced education, who ultimately want to transform it, but it's really hard to build the relationships to actually sell products through that could be transformational. So at Stemuli, what we've effectively done is we have combined school and careers into a video game. So I'll say that again, school and careers all together in a video game. And why this is transformational is because right now, if you look at the stats, majority of kids are not going to college. And if they go to college, they're not completing college. On the other end of the spectrum, when you look at industry, we have this big AI boom where we know hundreds of millions of people around the world are going to need to upskill in order to have jobs and make a living wage. But no one is sitting in the gap and saying, we are going to figure out a way to make sure people from a very young age understand the opportunities that are available to them and understand how math and science, some of these, what could be considered boring subjects, apply to their future. So ultimately, as I said, school and careers in a video game, that's all AI powered. And I think the most transformative part of what we're doing and why Matt is leading a great team here is, can you imagine being able to learn any subject or any career in a video game? We know video games work. There's 3.3 billion gamers in the world. That's over 30% of the worldwide population. The average age of gamers is 36. So this is not even a question of, is this only a game for kids? But we truly believe we're building an application that can be and should be used for lifelong learning, that can be hyper personalized to the user, and that can make the world so much smaller than it is today. If you imagine in a video game that looks like Grand Theft Auto, if you can put in headquarters from all of the major companies in the world, if you can put history of all the major continents and countries in the world, now all of a sudden you have a happy place, a safe place, and a place that's empowering people to grow skills to, make above a livable wage. So I know I said a whole lot, but again, the skinny of it is school, careers, and a video game built to increase your earning potential.
So that's a compelling message. And so how did Matt get involved? Like, to describe that journey with Matt, and then I'll go to Matt to get his view.
Yeah, no, I love this question. And I think it's kind of touches on something you mentioned earlier, which is like these mentors in my life. So one thing I would say, just circling back, is when I was dropped in LA, I was all by myself. And so any mentor that ended up in my life, I promise you, was given to me by God or some divine power that put these folks in my life, because it truly wasn't well orchestrated. I was just kind of rolling with what was being put in front of me. So the story of Matt is almost about 12 to 18 months ago, there was a gentleman by the name of Zach, and he posted something on Twitter, and he was like, I've come up with this really cool way to use AI and help with career navigation. So myself and my head of digital, we're sending, tweets back and forth to each other like, yo, do you see what this guy is doing? It seems like he might either be doing something similar to what we're trying to solve, or maybe he can partner with us. So we met with him in January of last year. And I was like, hey, Zach, here's what we're doing. You want to come work with us? I was totally, going after him as a talent. And Zach at the time said, I really want to keep kind of experimenting with my own projects, but I do have an individual that I think would be an amazing referral for you to work with. I'll make the introduction. Hopefully it works well, but good luck to you. You have this intro, call me if you need it. So I followed up on Zach's intro, and I, again, was kind of orchestrated by a divine power of God to bring somebody that had broad enough thinking background in philosophy, right? And then somebody that has the comp sci machine learning background, who can keep up with me on my big, broad ideas and how I want to change the world, but then can get nitty gritty and say, here's how we're going to do it. So to say the least, super happy with that conversation I had on Twitter in the introduction to Matt.
So Matt, why were you compelled to say, you know what, I'm really interested in Taylor's message, and you do have a really very good background. So I was looking at your background. It's a very strong background.
Oh, thanks very much. Yeah. So I guess I'll add a couple of bits, in terms of my path towards Stemuli, right? So after my PhD, I became a professor in Paris. And so I had this exposure to education as the educator, right? But there were lots of frustrations with that, and actually more with the research world as well. And I was kind of tinkering and prototyping on the side, and I started a company. And so before Stemuli, what I was working on was sports education, which, by the way, is really a horrible, horrible market to go after. Like everyone told me, and I didn't listen, I was like, no, I want to do this. Anyway, so I was doing like live coaching from phones. And so there was this immediately clear overlap, right, as we started talking, in terms of new ways to get information into people's heads, right, and like responsive ways to do that kind of stuff. But yeah, I have this checkered history, and so much of it does get drawn on at Stemuli. Like I built VR experiments using a game platform called Unity as part of my research career. And, that's pretty relevant because we often use Unity in our own products, so that gives me kind of insight in that piece. So yeah, it's really drawing on all these like random different patches that I've had in the last 10 to 15 years.
Yeah, and how can you not join Taylor, right? Because she's so
Right.
charismatic.
Yeah, exactly. It's a compelling pitch, right? So I came on, as an employee in August, brought in immediately like this very impressive AI engineer who I'd seen demoing here in Seattle. And we've built a little hub here in Seattle of AI excellence. We actually, later today, we're meeting our new joiner. That's going to be our second like pure play AI engineer. So I'll go off and meet him in person for the first time this morning.
Let's see, so you're based in Seattle?
Yep.
And then Taylor, you're kind of global, but where do you call home right now?
Dallas, Texas is home.
Yeah, and I guess, the world is virtual, so really it's kind of like one platform. That's the world, right? It doesn't matter where you live today.
Well, just picking up on that, back to the divine order here, we have a pocket of excellence of, engineers in Seattle that all have the backgrounds that, everybody loves hearing about, from Stanford to Berkeley, PhDs. We've got it. But I would say a lot of people say, no, you can get great talent from anywhere. I don't know if Matt wasn't on the ground meeting these folks in person, getting to know them, if we would have been to, as quickly as we did, get amazing talent that has already started to, shape the way we build.
Yeah, and then you have this kind of immersive XR, extended reality kind of capability within your system. And, Meta embraced this kind of idea. And then, of course, AI sort of swamped that. But now it's increasing again, right? This interest of digital twins and immersive reality is getting more attention again. But now with more integration with AI. So, Matt, I'd like to get your kind of science perspective of how do you see this integration happening and where it's going to go in the next few years. And then we'll tailor that into Taylor's vision overall strategically. And there's so many companies that you could partner with. There's the Generation Unlimited board, or I think there's a lot of synergy between them and what you're trying to do. There's a company called Goodwall. I think there's a lot of potential for you doing something with them. Clearly, Microsoft, and we could talk about your Microsoft journey. I could see this as an extension of LinkedIn, somehow tied into LinkedIn, and that could be an acquisition from them. Who knows, right? And the Microsoft for Startups journey, you must be embedded in that. So, anyways, let's go back to that. Where do you see this kind of AI, machine learning tying into the AR extended reality stuff, which is now getting more attention again? It kind of died a little bit because of this generative AI miracle that's happening, but now it's getting attention again.
Yeah, and there's this great joke on that, when I was working with VR during my PhD, like VR is the technology of the future, and it has been for 30 years, right? So the guy who did the quality control on my dissertation was Jeremy Bailenson at Stanford. And so, he's a big VR professor and thinker, co-founded a VR training company, was the person that Mark Zuckerberg went to before buying Oculus to like try out the latest tech. So, I was really steeped in that at the time. And VR is a very powerful medium for things that it's worth using for. So the way we really see it at Stemuli, we're not actively producing a VR product because where our users are is not yet on those headsets, right? They're somewhat expensive. They're not necessarily distributed around where our learners are going to be. So we think much more about PCs and laptops and phones and things like that. But the thing, to come back to your point around combining the two, the really crazy thing, even when you look at science fiction about VR, Like my favorite is the book Ready Player One in this respect. It's not really covered in the movie. Good movie, but the book has a bit more detail. Is the assumption is that every experience was going to be hand coded. And to some degree, the author kind of nerds out on this. Like the character goes into a pizza joint and he turns on his smell sensors in his room, right? And like someone has lovingly hand coded the pizza smell and so on. But that's super impractical. Now, with AI, we can just make more of the game. And so you'll get then to a point, whether it's in VR or not, where you have data that's relevant to the user and how they learn and what they enjoy and things like that, and engaging them. And you have data that you want to present to them in the form of educational content. And you just take those together, make a soup, and generate an immersive playable experience. And so we have prototypes that do that already. There are, of course, other ways that you can use AI to make games. There's very cool demos where people are generating frame by frame with the neural net and that kind of thing. But if you come back to like, where are our users today? They're not on devices that can really sustain that kind of generation. So we have to be a bit more creative.
Yeah, but it's going to be in your timelines, right? Because, you see the Ray-Ban glasses, this idea of constantly, embedding this into glasses. So it's a form factor that's light, it's easier, it's more accessible, getting the price points down. So you can see the movement again, the interest, right? And in fact, I recently interviewed Alvin Graylin, and he's a VR leader, a great background. He used to be president of HTC. So, in fact, I did a conference with him called Futureport for Youth. In fact, both of you would be great for this conference. You, particular Taylor, because you're the CEO, you're the founder of this a miracle, right? So, something I can do after this is maybe you'd be interested in this really large innovation youth-based conference. But between the two of you, you'd make an awesome kind of dual presentation at the same time. You can kind of riff off each other. Anyways, that's kind of a side thought. We can park that if you're interested, or reach out to me afterwards. I could do introductions. But do you in your planning then, you must be thinking of this though, right? Maybe 2 years out then, or something like that, when the hardware catches up, or.
Yeah, I won't give a time prediction, but I will tell you a little bit of our secret sauce here. So in our virtual world, for those of you that play games, it's something that looks like Grand Theft Auto without the theft part of it, but it looks like a real world that's like stylized. In that real world, we have something called a research assisted device, and it is actually built like it is an AR headset that you're using in the game. And so my secret that I don't often talk to my team about is I wanted to put that there. So at the point in time that AR becomes more ubiquitous, now all of a sudden, if people are accessing the interface for our research assisted device through these other devices, well, we've been training them on how to use our technology for years, and now it's just accessible on a new device. So it is definitely something we are absolutely thinking about. And we're prepared for. As you know, Unity does port wherever you want to optimize it for. It can port anywhere. I think, the other point that Matt's making and hasn't been said is one of the biggest opportunities that I see in the AR VR space is you don't have many people that are thinking of it like a game, right? It's not necessarily a persistent world. You go in, you can be with other people, you can manipulate objects, you can participate in content, but after you leave, you come back out and all of a sudden it's restarted. You're not necessarily engaging with something that has these spark passes and these battle passes that are encouraging you to come back, month over month because there's something new that's available, or there's a leaderboard that you're competing with, or new friends that you're meeting in this world. So those are really our two things on AR. One, yes, we'll be ready for it. And we have some little seeds we're planning now. Then two, I believe when we get to the point where most everything is AR, the reason we'll win is because we spent all of this time focusing on the engagement loops and the learning as it relates to retention, as opposed to let's just get them all the devices and have a cool experience that they might engage in 30 minutes and not come back to.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite exciting where you can possibly go with this. And In fact, I was judging at a World Innovation Technology Services Alliance, WITSA. They represent 90% of big tech or tech globally, right? They had an innovation contest and judged at that. But I could see you doing really well. In fact, the winner, let's see here, the winner was an education company out of Southeast Asia, and they're really scaling really quickly. I could see you partnering with them. So, and they're entrepreneurial. There are a couple of folks from Southeast Asia that went to MIT or something like that, became friends, and then they kind of serial entrepreneurs, and then they decide to hit the education space. And, I think they're scaling out to the tens of millions of ARR now, something like that. So, but they definitely don't use the kind of tech you have. So I think there'd be maybe some way you can work with them. So that's remarkable. I thought you were using the Microsoft tech stack, or maybe you're not. Are you embedded in Microsoft or?
Yeah, we have a mixed tech stack, and I can let Matt talk a little bit more about this. But yeah, Microsoft got us in early with the Microsoft for Startups program, as you mentioned. And so Azure is definitely something that we have utilized on our back end, and other cool little things that assist in the development of our game and holding inventory items and things like that.
So Matt, on the technical sort of deep learning AI side, and if you're using the Microsoft platform, there's the Visual Studio, and you have access to all of or a lot of the major, both proprietary and non-proprietary open source models. Are you leveraging some of that, or are you able to talk a little bit more about the underlying tech?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we're fairly promiscuous, right, when it comes to the different models and different providers and so on. We're not super wedded to anyone. But I guess one thing that might be interesting that I feel like I can share actually goes like this. So various model providers want to bake in censorship. And you would have thought, right, well, we can call a spade, right? Like, there are reasons why you want to censor or not, right? Like all sorts of bad things can come out of models if you poke them in the wrong way. Now, you might have thought that we would want those models, right? Or that we would be like heavy users of pre-specified moderation endpoints or things like that, right? Like, hey, there's all this package stuff to make sure that bad things don't come out. But actually, we find it more productive to build our own systems. Because the tricky thing, right, if you imagine prompting a model that someone else hosts that you don't necessarily have all the details of, the tricky thing about that, once it's got these safeguards in, is you can't be sure in production that you're not going to trigger them. I don't really want a kid to say something innocuous or like make some interaction, right, with our NPC robots, click on a button that's going through a workflow, and then have it come back like, no, that was offensive, denied, right? Like, that's a bad experience. And so the funny thing is, it's better to start with uncensored models and build your own safety system and tooling around it for the purposes that we're engaged in, especially, when it comes to like live inference features. It doesn't matter so much if you're pre-generating things or whatever. If you get a bad one, just regenerate it. But that has been a kind of I guess, a surprising discovery for us.
So, but you'll deal with some pre-trained ones anyways, right? And then
yeah, they're all pre-trained. Yeah. When it comes to like making those requests to these very large models, I mean, what I say, and I think we're going to put out some blog posts on this, like, again, just a little bit of secret sauce maybe, right, is I'm really obsessed with what I call short cycle R&D, right? We are not some big fundamental AI lab. And that's not going to work for us economically or in terms of timeframes or whatever, right? We're using tools and figuring out the application layer for the most part. And so we're not, training, like, I don't know if you saw the latest, right? Like DeepSeek came out and it's like 600 billion parameters and this kind of thing. Like, that's not us. We will use the whole stack above that, fine tunes or all these kinds of things. But yeah, I mean, these are all pre-trained models, but just to give a shout out, right, there's a provider called Grok with a Q, confusingly enough, right, like similar to the Elon Musk X Grok. but with a Q, and they offer really fast, uncensored models. And there are a few others, in that vein, like Samba Systems. There's one I'm blanking on, and I really shouldn't be. Maybe it's Cognisys. Anyway, so there's a few of these, like maybe slightly less famous providers that are offering really fast inference on models that you can basically build anything on top of.
Are these models, so they're not open source then? They're kind of commercial models, but they don't have all the layers, or you don't have to worry about, as you indicated, kind of limit. I find that as well. And when you deal with these ones that are a little bit more advanced, or have not advanced, but they have more layers to them, then it kind of limits their capability, I find.
Yeah, where, I mean, the providers, OpenAI, Anthropic, whoever, right? Like they have a responsibility and that's how they're achieving it. But sometimes that's, it's not helpful. But to come back to your point, no, these are open weights models. They're often from Meta, for example, right? Like the Llama series, just provided in a really fast way.
Yeah, or Mistral is out there.
Yeah. And we found that Mixtral in particular is quite good at storytelling.
And then you have like DeepSeek 3. It actually made a lot of noise, got a lot of press because it's actually very capable. And they did it with like very little cost.
Yeah, there are all these memes that it's like the first Iron Man movie, like DeepSeek did this in a like export controlled cave, so I enjoy those.
Yeah, 5.6 million, that's it. It's
only 5 million. But that kind of brings you back, right? Like that's why companies like us, like, why would we spend 5 million recreating that? Unless there was really a purpose to it. It's much better for us to combine things and figure out the education piece.
Yeah, so that's kind of fascinating, and I mean, I could spend an entire kind of interview just on the tech side, but we got to sort of broaden it again. So Taylor, I mean, you're in the Microsoft program, probably some others as well now. Microsoft has this thing called the Pegasus program. Are you part of that program? You must be part of that program, right?
No, we're not. I think previous time we chatted, we had talked about it, but we're not a part of the Pegasus program. We'll have to follow up on that after.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely would poke at them and say, hey, we're Pegasus qualified, and then they'll ask you a whole bunch of questions and making sure that you fit some of the requirements. But then you get more resources, right?
Okay, what's that?
Yeah, and you get more access to stuff, and I definitely recommend it. The thing is, you can suggest it, but then they have to invite you.
Okay.
Right? It's not like you can just get into it. But it's good if you kind of poke at them and say, "Hey, why aren't I in the Pegasus? I think I'm ready for Pegasus."
Okay, yeah, I know exactly the person to call.
Right. So, there's limitations on what we talk about in terms of funding rounds and things like that because of security regulations and so on. But it's public. There's public information that you now raise subsequent rounds, and it's difficult when you raise higher rounds. But you also won awards. Can you talk about maybe some of the major awards you've won?
Sure. Well, the way we met was winning the AI for Good Global Innovation Factory Challenge, and that was a once in a lifetime experience. My team came out. We spent some time in London before we hopped over to Geneva, and then all of a sudden, within the last 3 months, we got notification from the QS education team that we were selected as a finalist in their future of work category. And so as far as the most recent award that we've won, we took home the gold prize. So that's the world's top prize as far as a future of work application and innovation. And we were also a finalist for the Global EdTech Award for all of QS education. And I was actually told after that, that we've literally moved so fast and far in the last 3 to 6 months that if our application had the same things that we were talking about as far as some of the updates that we had done, that they thought we would be the global winner. And I want to kind of touch on the significance of awards because, to be honest with you, they're cool. but that's not why we're in this business, right? We're totally in this business because we want to impact millions, if not billions of lives over generations. But one thing that my eyes were open to is in this QS Education Award and even some of the rooms ran with the Gates Foundation, you have kind of the most important people in education. You have the educational researchers, PhDs, you have the product developers and curriculum developers, and then you have the education, school districts, and higher education institutions. So within December, I spent time both in a room with all Gates grantees that represent those bodies, product developers, researchers, and the school districts. And then I spent time in almost the same equivalent in London, but with organizations from around the world, from Singapore to New Zealand to Australia, Africa, you name it. And after we presented the technology and what we were doing, the feedback that we got was like, you guys are light years ahead of where the rest of the education world is, and how you're thinking about transformation at the connection of like workforce development and education going together. So I say all that to say that we're super excited to win the awards because it does signify something. But for me, it's just an indicator that we're headed down the right track on a global scale, not just something that can work here in Texas, not just something that can work nationally across the United States of the Americas, but truly people in organizations all the way from what is like your K-12, as we call it in America, all the way to higher ed across the world. They want this product. Everybody is itching for it to be in the hands of users and kind of change the way, the efficiency behind our education systems.
So Taylor, I mean, we talked about this before, to poke around to see if you qualify for YPO. And within YPO, even though they were originally founded as sort of an education peer-to-peer sharing network with CEOs, they do have a deal network as well. And in fact, they held one of the first global summits in Dubai a few weeks ago. And there were 12, I could only talk about this, it went public, but they had 1,200 people attending, and they had 26 billion in deals done. So I think that's such a natural for you. Have you progressed on that at all, or?
I'm so glad you asked. I was invited to YPO DFW, so I'm going through the process to get into the DFW chapter of YPO now.
Okay, that's great. And then what you should do is then join the deal network. Right? And at some point, if you're interested, and only because I interviewed him, his name is Ross Fellows. He's one of the founders of the Deal Network, and he's YPO Gold, so he's kind of more senior. And I did a 2.5-hour interview, so I can only share this guy because it's a very private organization, but he went public with this in my interview. When you're ready, I'm happy to do an introduction, but he's more an M&A sort of specialist. So once you're ready to be acquired by a strategic, he will get you a great deal. So when you feel you're ready, let me know, and I'll introduce you to him. He's superb at it, and he can take you over the finish line. So okay, so that's good to know that you already got that process going. And I think they're going to hold another global summit coming up soon on the business side where you can deal.
Okay.
And what you're doing is perfect, right? So now, Matt, I'm going to get a little bit technical again with you. You're a researcher. You're handling the kind of AI machine learning part of what's happening here and more. Have you looked at other models and kind of poking around some of the papers that have dropped, like the Kolmogorov neural networks and what they mean? Maybe it could supplant. Have you been looking at the O3, what's happening with the O3 coming out next year from OpenAI and this kind of reasoning capability?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And have you been looking at Gamma Scope and, the Neuropedia and, the sparse autoencoder kind of work and things like that? There's a paper maybe dropped about a year and a half ago on knowledge graphs, and how you could use knowledge graphs to, and they're kind of taking a look to see what's happening inside. Have you been spending any time in those kinds of things, or maybe you're just really now focused on the, taking it to the, the solution side and not so much the, what's coming out for
Yeah, I mean, we pay attention to everything, right? So we are fairly voracious. I would say that my individual contributors are more diligent than I am right now in terms of going through, the details of every paper. But to your point, there are all sorts of interesting architectures. But I saw some really smart stuff recently that convinced me to pay attention to those, but not really worry too much, which goes like this, right? What we're doing, because we want to serve people across these large geographies, because they're often going to be on relatively resource-constrained devices, it's going to involve the cloud, right? It's going to involve serving models from the cloud or serving responses. Now, when you get to the actual physical plant, that's all being optimized for the transformers architecture. And so there's already going to be baked in like this pretty substantial lag. Even if some killer new architecture came out, all those data centers would have to be like physically retooled. And so, we're interested, but that's not really our focus. Now, to come to the point of like O3 test time compute and all those kinds of things, yes, we are interested in, for example, the O1 minis and those kinds of things, where you need, say, very intelligent reasoning, for example, like subject matter expert kind of content and things like that. But it's slow, almost by definition, right? Like, we're not really going to escape that. Like, even if it becomes as fast as the responses that you're going to get from like today's quick models, as it were, the goalposts are going to move and those models are going to be even faster, right? So it may get to the point where you could use it for a live feature, but you're kind of back, right? Like when O1 came out, like Confession, right? I wasn't that excited to begin with. I've become more excited as I see like, the way that approach is going. But I was kind of like, well, that's cool, guys, but this is even more opaque. Like, oh, how did we achieve this? Well, we used like some reinforcement learning. Excellent. Well, that describes nothing. That doesn't give me any insight, right? And anyway, we figured it out. But meanwhile, internally, we invented a pattern. I believe one of my engineers has actually written about this on LinkedIn if people are interested, called interactors. And interactors is really just like a systematized atomic approach to chain of thought. And anyway, to come back to the point, if you think about these test time compute reasoning models and it's doing all the thinking tokens and all that business, that's fine. But if we can replicate that behavior in what other people call an agentic system, but we're not so grand, so we just call it interacting. Right? If we can replicate that kind of, if you think of like a pinball machine, right? Like it's bouncing around these different parts that we've arranged, then we know everything that's going on. We can precisely control errors or issues that might be happening within that system. We're not waiting for like a ... for like 5 minutes and then it says, oh, sorry, I crapped out. And we just have much better observability. So I don't want to insult any particular approach. When it comes to what we're doing, we really love knowing what's going on at the really micro level. And we have a lot of responsibility. So, if I'm going to be responsible for features going out, I don't really want to be sending them out where it's like some kind of long test time compute approach and I can't be sure what it's going to do next.
Yeah, I mean, it's an exciting time. And I'm a futurist. So, I mean, sort of thinking about this when I was like 3 years old. So, the thing is, when I used to predict out when I was really young, I would be predicting out where we are today. So, it's interesting. My keynotes when I was doing in my 20s, I would say like in 50 years, this is what's going to happen. And then in my 50s, I would say, well, in 20 years, this is what's going to happen. And now my keynotes are, now it's happening. And you can't really predict out where things are going. To both of you, I have two questions. First of all, Taylor, what do you think what the world is going to look like in, let's say, 6 years? And then is it going to be like Kurzweil's near singularity? Is it going to be like Eric Schmidt and some of the things he's talking about, including this private talk he did at Stanford, which got taken down off the internet? Is it, or do you think it's further out? And then I'll get Matt's point of view as well. So And then after that, the last question is, a recommendation or maybe a question to leave the audience. But first of all, let's deal with this question. How do you see the world in 6 years?
Sure. It's an interesting question. As you know, we just had elections in the United States, and based upon the results of those elections, what we look at as far as what will happen, in the next 4 to 6 years, just because of different policies and regulations, it actually starts to like kind of open up the world to us. So, for example, in America, we're looking at a policy that will take our traditional education system from something that typically goes, you have your property tax dollars that are funding and you have federal government funding it, to the federal government saying, and when I say funding it means dollars going directly to the school district to serve kids. We're seeing a movement now where people want to see those dollars go to families. So if you do the math behind that, we spend about $15,000 on average to educate every kid every year in America, 49 million kids. When you do the quick math, that's $776 billion that potentially could be going now directly to the consumer, to the family, to decide how they want to educate their kids. With all that said, for anybody that's in any sort of venture capital business, it's like, whoa, gold rush, go after it. The other side of that is you're still going to be dealing with the same challenges that we deal with today, which is like you have people in rural America, you have people in urban centers that just because opportunity and resources are available, it doesn't mean they're actually finding out about it. It doesn't mean they're accessing it at the same levels that others that might have that knowledge are. And so I'm really saying two things, and I know I'm not speaking this from a technology standpoint, but I will get there. I believe we're getting ready to be in a place where there is going to be an even more desperate need for education to sit in the palm of somebody's hands or in their households. And what I'm also kind of predicting is we're going to be trending downwards, honestly. Like people are going to start to get very scared about their jobs when you think about upskilling with AI, when you think about trying to keep up, when you think about the cost of college, but the return that college gives on you. So all of that to say, what does a great entrepreneur do? You take a crisis and turn it into an opportunity. I believe that we're in a place that because we have been studying these technologies in this market for over a decade and accelerating now, that as the bottom starts to fall out, you're going to have technology and entrepreneurs like the ones that exist at Stemuli that are filling the gap and saying, okay, you no longer have to depend on leaving your house to get educated. Everywhere you are, there's enough information in the world that we're going to use the interactors and all the cool technology that Matt's talking about to ensure that you have everything you need to learn. And I believe that's going to exist from the level of, a kid being in elementary school, being able to tap into these applications and not having to depend on any reliable adult in your life. What I challenge my team to do is I want you to build as if the individuals accessing our platform don't have anybody reliable in their life. The only thing they can rely on is the tech we're using. So I say all of that because, I think you could chart a linear graph here of, hey, cause and effect. Some policies are going to flood the market with money, but when you actually see achievement, I don't think the market being flooded with money means there's going to be better achievement. I think it's going to be technology like this that's sitting in the hands of everybody that's going to change that. And what will the world look like? It'll look like a video game. I'm going Ready Player One with that we'll all be tuned into this personalized game that's built just for us.
Okay, so Matt, excuse me, your point of view, but you got about a minute and a half. So,
well, luckily, I have a concise tendency, right? I mean, Taylor said a lot of it already. I guess 3 things I think are important to remember if we're talking about, AGI or singularities or things like that. The first is there's a helpful recent talk from Ilya Sutskever where he talks about like the breakdown of scaling, right? So maybe what's worked for us in the last couple of years isn't going to work in the future. And OpenAI themselves seem to be kind of acknowledging that in the direction they're taking, right? There's the overused, right, William Gibson quote, "The future is already here, it's just unevenly distributed." Taylor already highlighted geographic inequality, right, and demographic and structural inequalities there. But actually within our lives, even if we're like very plugged in, we experience this all the time, right? So when I came to America, I was amazed that I had to go in person. It was just like the movie Zootopia, to these like slow lines in the DMV and all this stuff. And yet I was doing that a few miles away from Apple's campus, and there were self-driving robots in the town where I lived, but next to a train from the 1950s, or practically, right? Like the cow train. So that was just really crazy. So especially in American life, you experience that all the time. You're interacting with the past and the future. I've never sent more paper to the government, right? Than since I came here. Anyway, so even if all that had happened, it'll take a while to percolate through different parts of life. Maybe it will never reach some institutions. And we're trying to do our part for education, because without us, maybe it won't happen, right? It's as simple as that. And then when it comes to bringing tech to education, I'm going to be a bit salty for a second. So there's a thing that I call the Duolingo problem, right? Like you have a 7-year streak in Japanese, but then when you go there, you can't actually speak to anyone. So, there's a question of what you use this tech for, and you can build great businesses and so on. We really want to be empowering people both with career skills and then also with like deeper understanding of topics they're interested in.
Yeah, unfortunately, we ran out of time here, but I think both of your viewpoints in terms of where things are going in the next 6 years are, really stimulating for the audience. There's questions in there to get them to consider where the future is and how good they can partake. And you're definitely, a foundational element of the future of education, and people will be paying attention. So I want to thank you both for taking the time to spend, this hour with me and looking at different aspects of technology, of humanity, of the world, and of education, and how we can update education to be to the modern times and where it's going. So both of you are tremendously skilled, amazing people who are transformational. Thank you for taking this hour with me and sharing your insights.
Thanks so much, Stephen.
Thank you, Steve.
Talk soon.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.